now. Maroonage, the concept of maroonage, where people were escaping from plantations, that established even maroon societies were acting counter to that plantation system, and in resistance to that system, they were establishing self-determined democratic societies where land was owned in the commons. So there's always been this push and pull. There's always been this resistance to that private land ownership system. Because where we are now is in a system where real estate is commodified, and we're playing a different game a lot of times than the game that's being played around us. Because investors come in, local and foreign, and are purchasing property to resell at scale, at $1 million, $1 billion scale and profits, while families are trying to find somewhere to live and want that land to be able to pass it generationally, maybe to be able to sell it later as an investment to finance your kids' college education or something, possibly. But we're existing with water balloons at a gunfight. Like, we're not even trying to fight. We're not even trying to play this speculative real estate game, but that's the game that's being played up under us. And the market is not marketing us. So the tagline we always use is, the way real estate works is not working for us. So moving into how a community stewardship trust works, it stabilizes or the most common usage is stabilizing housing prices by removing the land value. So the land in a trust is perpetually held by a nonprofit organization, a trust, and the structures and buildings on that land are what can be purchased, usually along with a very long-term 99-year lease that is extremely inexpensive. It's like $1 for the 99-year lease. And then that 99-year lease can be passed down, it can be inherited, it can be renewed. The trust itself is sometimes owned by the state. Sometimes it is a separately held organization. The trust that we are building in Atlanta is going to be a community-owned community land trust, where the trust itself is owned by the tenants themselves, not necessarily an outside entity. So multiple types of properties can exist in that trust. You can have single-family homes, you can have apartment buildings. The goal of most existing community land trusts is focused around home ownership and minimizing the barrier to home ownership by taking the land price down, so the housing becomes the only thing you're having to finance and pay for. But there's a growing number of community land trusts that are also focused on rental properties. Ours in Atlanta also is the first, I think, in Atlanta, and one of the first in the United States that has a rental property in it. We have we have a 9-unit apartment building that we're trying to figure out how to eventually turn that into a tenant-owned building that is also existing in this tenant-owned, community-owned land trust as well. What's possible in a community land trust? Housing isn't the only option. It's a huge one, but what's also possible is permanently affordable housing. And by affordable, I mean housing that does not take more than 30% of your income. It's housing that is stabilized in price, that your property taxes are not going to drastically accelerate. Your rent, if it's a rental property, is not going to drastically accelerate. What's possible is cultural preservation sites and retention of historically and culturally important sites that aren't necessarily housing, but properties that are maintained for the public good. Also ecological preservation and regeneration, ecologically sensitive sites that we don't want people building on the cliffs of Bathsheba. We don't want apartments there because this is a space that the community has always held. We want that to stay in a community ownership space. That is really the strength of a land trust. And so another kind of underpinning of land trust is that property is held perpetually by the trust. It cannot be sold. If the entity that holds the land trust decides to sell it, it either has to, by covenant, by law, go to another nonprofit organization that will hold it in the same way, or it reverts to the state. But built into kind of the legal structure of a land trust is that that land is off of the speculative market. An individual cannot own it, buy it, sell it, play chess and checkers with it, fund their life with it, so forth. So the difference between, say, a land trust and government housing, normally when you have a land trust that is owned by, say, the local government, it's often, I don't want to say a public-private partnership, but there's an entity in between. There's a partnership of this trust and the local government that are kind of working together to manage and administer it. The difference there with government is usually government housing, at least in my understanding, my parlance of it, is the housing then is owned by the government. That is the entity that is holding not just the land, but also the housing itself, the buildings itself. So that would be the distinction there, where with that land trust, you're holding the structure that exists on the land with that long-term renewable 99-year lease that is functioning as your, well, yeah, it's a lease. It's a long-term lease to exist and stay on that land. So it's kind of separating the structure and the land in a different way than where government housing usually kind of still keeps those two together.